The wind whispered through the tall prairie grass as Delilah Carter huddled closer to the meager flames of her campfire, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The year was 1878, and the Montana Territory stretched vast and unforgiving around her. 3 days ago, outlaws had ambushed her wagon train, killing her uncle, her only living relative, and stealing their supplies. Only her quick thinking and the dense forest had saved her from a similar fate. The night grew colder, and Delilah's stomach clenched with hunger. Her provisions would last another day at most. With no horse and miles from the nearest settlement, her situation was growing desperate. She stared into the dancing flames, trying to ignore the distant howl of a wolf and the crushing weight of solitude. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the firelight. Delilah froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the small Derringer pistol tucked in her boot, the only protection she had left. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she cocked the weapon, aiming it toward the sound. "I mean no harm, madam," came a deep voice from the shadows. "Just seeking a bit of warmth if you'd be willing to share." A tall figure emerged from the darkness, leading a chestnut mare. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but Delilah could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of beard. His duster coat was dusty from the trail, and his eyes, when they caught the firelight, were a piercing blue. "Stay where you are," Delilah commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "State your business." The stranger raised his hands slowly. "Name's Nathan Reed, just a cowboy heading north to the Double R Ranch. Been riding since sunrise and spotted your fire." He nodded toward her pistol. "Appreciate the caution, but I ain't looking for trouble. Just a spot by your fire for the night." Delilah hesitated. Every instinct told her to send him away, but the reality of her situation couldn't be ignored. Alone, with dwindling supplies and no horse, her chances of survival were slim. "You can stay by the fire," she finally said, keeping the pistol trained on him, "but keep your distance and your hands where I can see them." Nathan nodded, his expression grave. "Fair enough." He carefully tied his horse to a nearby tree and settled across the fire from her, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "You're a long way from anywhere," he observed, not unkindly. "Not safe for a woman alone." "I wasn't alone until 3 days ago," Delilah replied tersely, lowering her pistol but keeping it in her lap. "Outlaws hit our wagon. My uncle didn't make it." Nathan's expression softened. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a packet wrapped in oilcloth. "Don't mean to presume, but you look like you could use some food. Got some jerky and hardtack if you're willing." Delilah's pride warred with her hunger. After a moment, she gave a short nod. "Much obliged." As Nathan passed her a portion of his provisions, their fingers brushed momentarily. The simple human contact after days of isolation nearly brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. They ate in silence for a while, the crackling fire and distant night sounds the only accompaniment. Delilah studied him covertly. His movements were efficient and deliberate, his gaze occasionally scanning their surroundings with the wariness of someone accustomed to the dangers of the frontier. "Where are you headed?" he asked eventually, his voice breaking the quiet. "Clearwater," she replied. "My cousin lives there with her husband. It's still about 50 miles north." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "That's near the Double R. I could escort you there if you'd allow it. These parts ain't safe for lone travelers, man or woman." Delilah stiffened. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Reed, but I don't know you. My trust isn't given easily, especially to strangers." The cowboy looked into the fire, shadows playing across his face. "Wise policy out here, but consider this one fire's not enough to keep the wolves and worse at bay in these parts." He met her gaze across the flames. "Sometimes you need more than just your own strength to survive." She studied him, weighing his words against her instincts. "I'll think on it overnight," she finally said. "Fair enough," he replied, stretching out his bedroll a respectful distance from the fire. "I'll keep first watch if you want to get some sleep." Delilah hadn't had a proper rest since the attack, always jerking awake at every sound. The offer was tempting, but caution held her back. "I'm fine." Nathan nodded without argument and settled back against his saddle. "Then I'll bid you good night, Miss Carter," she supplied after a moment's hesitation. Delilah Carter, Miss Carter, he repeated, tipping his hat. Pleasant dreams when you decide to have them, hours passed. Despite her determination to stay vigilant, Delilah found her eyelids growing heavy. Nathan had drifted off, his breathing deep and even. She studied his sleeping form, noticing the worn leather of his boots, the calluses on his hands, signs of a man who worked hard for his living. Not the hands of an outlaw or a dandy. When she finally surrendered to sleep, it was with the derringer clutched tightly in her hand, ready for the first sign of betrayal. The aroma of coffee woke her with a start. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and for a disorienting moment, Delilah forgot where she was. Then reality flooded back. She bolted upright, alarmed to discover she'd slept soundly through the night. Nathan was crouched by a freshly built fire, a small pot of coffee brewing on the coals. "Morning," he greeted, not looking up from his task. "Hope you don't mind. Figured we could both use some coffee before deciding what comes next." Delilah straightened her rumpled dress, embarrassed to have been caught so vulnerable. "I didn't mean to sleep so long. Looked like you needed it." He poured the dark liquid into a tin cup and offered it to her. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." She accepted the cup cautiously, savoring the bitter warmth. It was the first coffee she'd had since the attack, and it tasted like heaven despite its roughness. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said finally. "If you're still willing to escort me to Clearwater, I'd be grateful, but I want to be clear I can pay for your services when we arrive. This isn't charity." Nathan nodded, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "Never crossed my mind, Miss Carter. As I said, I'm headed that direction anyway." He gestured to his horse. "Daisy here can carry double for a spell, though we'll need to take it slower." Delilah glanced at the mare, who was contentedly grazing nearby. "You're certain she can manage?" "She's stronger than she looks," Nathan replied, patting the horse's flank affectionately. Like most females I've encountered, despite herself, Delilah felt a smile tug at her lips. "Very well, Mr. Reed, it seems we have an arrangement." Breaking camp took little time. Delilah had few possessions left after the raid, just a small bundle of clothing and her uncle's pocket watch. Nathan helped her mount Daisy, then swung up behind her. The proximity made her tense, but practicality won out over discomfort. "Ready?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes," she replied, straightening her spine. "Let's ride." They set off at a steady pace, the rhythm of the horses' hooves marking time as the sun climbed higher. Nathan kept a respectful distance despite their shared saddle, his arms extended around her to hold the reins without pressing against her back. The prairie stretched before them, tall grasses swaying in the breeze. In the distance, the foothills of the mountains rose like sentinels against the sky. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed, both frightening and exhilarating in its vastness. "How long have you been working at the Double R?" Delilah asked, breaking the silence. "Going on 5 years now," Nathan replied. "Started as a regular hand, worked my way up to foreman last spring." "That's impressive." He shrugged, the movement transferring through the slight space between them. "Just did the work that needed doing. The old foreman took a fall from his horse, broke his leg bad, decided to retire to his daughter's place in St. Louis, and before the Double R." There was a pause, long enough that Delilah wondered if she'd overstepped. "Moved around," he finally said. "Texas, mostly, did some work for the Army as a scout during the Troubles." The Troubles could have meant many things in the West Indian conflicts, border disputes, the aftermath of the war between the states. Delilah sensed he didn't care to elaborate, so she didn't press. "What about you, Miss Carter?" Nathan asked. "What brings you out to these parts?" Delilah watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. I've been living with my uncle in Kansas City since then. He decided to try his luck out west, heard about land opportunities in Montana." She swallowed hard. "He was a good man, didn't deserve to die like that." Nathan's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Few do, in my experience." They rode in silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Around midday, they stopped by a small creek to rest the horse and eat some of Nathan's provisions. "We're making good time," he commented, studying the sun's position. "Should reach the Miller place by nightfall. They're good folks, about 20 miles from here. They'll put us up for the night." Delilah nodded, relief washing over her at the prospect of a real bed and safety in numbers. You know them well. Well enough. Jacob Miller trades with the ranch. Sometimes he's got away with horses. His wife Emma makes the best apple pie this side of the Mississippi. Nathan smiled at the memory. They've got 3 little ones, all girls, good family. As they prepared to mount up again, Delilah noticed Nathan wince slightly as he adjusted his saddle. Are you hurt? She asked. He shook his head dismissively. Old injury acts up sometimes. Nothing to worry about. But when he thought she wasn't looking, Delilah saw him press a hand to his left side, his expression momentarily tight with pain. It made her wonder what other stories were written on his body, what scars and memories he carried beneath his stoic exterior. They continued their journey as clouds began to gather on the horizon. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, and Nathan pushed them to a faster pace, eager to reach shelter before the storm broke. There it is, he said several hours later, pointing to a column of smoke rising from a small homestead nestled in a protected valley. Miller Place. Relief flooded through Delilah at the sight of the neat cabin and barn, a vegetable garden visible to one side and children's toys scattered in the yard. It was a picture of normalcy and safety that she had feared she might never see again. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, squinting at them before recognition dawned on his face. Nathan Reed, is that you? He called, walking toward them with his hand raised in greeting. None other, Nathan replied, raising his own hand. Hope you've got room for 2 weary travelers tonight, Jacob. The farmer's gaze shifted to Delilah, curiosity evident. Always room for friends. Who's your companion? This is Miss Delilah Carter, Nathan explained as he dismounted and helped Delilah down. She lost her party to outlaws a few days back. I'm escorting her to her cousin's place in Clearwater. Jacob Miller's expression sobered. Mighty sorry to hear that, Miss Carter. You're welcome here, of course. He turned toward the cabin and called, Emma, we've got company. A plump, pleasant-faced woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. 3 little girls peeked around her skirts, their eyes wide with curiosity. Nathan Reed, Emma exclaimed warmly. What a pleasant surprise, and you've brought a friend. After introductions were made, they were ushered into the cozy cabin. The smell of baking bread and stew filled the air, making Delilah's mouth water. The simple domesticity of the scene, children playing on the floor, a cat dozing by the hearth, the tidy arrangement of furniture brought a lump to her throat. It was everything she had dreamed of having someday, everything that had seemed impossibly distant these past harrowing days. You poor dear, Emma clucked after hearing a condensed version of Delilah's ordeal. You must be exhausted. Girls, show Miss Carter to the spare room so she can freshen up before supper. The oldest of the Miller girls, about 8 years old, took Delilah's hand solemnly. I'm Sarah. You can share my hairbrush if you want, Delilah smiled, touched by the innocent offer. Thank you, Sarah. That's very kind. The room they led her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered by a colorful quilt. A wash basin had been placed on a simple stand, and Emma followed with a pitcher of water. Take your time, dear, the farmer's wife said kindly. Supper won't be ready for another half hour. Left alone, Delilah sank onto the bed, overcome by emotion. The kindness of strangers, after the brutality she had witnessed, was almost too much to bear. She allowed herself a few tears before washing her face and doing her best to tidy her appearance with Sarah's offered hairbrush. When she emerged, she found Nathan and Jacob seated at the kitchen table, deep in conversation that halted abruptly at her appearance. Nathan stood, and Delilah was struck by the transformation in him. He had washed and trimmed his beard, and his dark hair was neatly combed. In clean clothes, he cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength in his bearing. Miss Carter, he acknowledged with a nod. You look refreshed. Thank you, she replied, suddenly self-conscious. Mrs. Miller was kind enough to provide water to wash. Emma bustled in from the root cellar, arms full of vegetables. Just in time to help with supper, if you're willing. Delilah gladly assisted, finding comfort in the familiar domestic tasks. As they worked, Emma asked gentle questions about her journey and her plans, careful not to probe too deeply into painful subjects. "And how do you know Nathan?" the woman asked, her eyes twinkling with subtle curiosity. "We only met last night," Delilah admitted. "He found me at my campfire and offered his protection on the journey to Clearwater." Emma nodded approvingly. "You couldn't ask for a better escort. Nathan's one of the good ones respected all through these parts." At the table, Nathan was entertaining the Miller children with a story about a crafty fox, his deep voice animated as he described the animal's adventures. Watching him interact with the little girls, patient and kind as they interrupted with questions, Delilah saw a different side to the quiet, vigilant cowboy who had ridden with her all day. Supper was a lively affair, with fresh bread, venison stew, and garden vegetables. For Delilah, who had subsisted on meager rations for days, it was a feast beyond compare. The conversation flowed easily, focusing on local news, the progress of the Miller's farm, and the latest gossip from town. "Heard there was trouble up near Whitefish last week," Jacob mentioned, reaching for another piece of bread. "Stage got held up, 2 passengers wounded." Nathan's expression turned serious. "Same gang that's been working this territory since spring," Jacob nodded grimly. "Sounds like it." "Sheriff Tanner's been trying to organize a posse, but they're slippery as eels, strike fast and disappear into the hills." Delilah tensed, the food suddenly tasteless in her mouth. "Did they wear red bandanas?" she asked quietly. "Their leader, did he have a scar across his cheek?" All eyes turned to her. Nathan's gaze sharpened with interest. "You saw them?" "Just briefly before I ran," she replied, her hands trembling slightly. "There were 5 of them. The leader had that scar and a black hat with a rattlesnake band. They called him Viper." Jacob and Nathan exchanged looks. "That's them all right," Jacob confirmed. "The Viper gang, been terrorizing the territory for months now." "Did you see their faces clearly?" Nathan asked, his tone gentle but intent. "Could you identify them?" Delilah nodded slowly. "The leader and at least 2 others. They weren't wearing masks when they first approached our wagon, only pulled up the bandanas when the shooting started." A heavy silence fell over the table, broken only by the innocent chatter of the youngest Miller child, oblivious to the tension. "That information could be valuable to Sheriff Tanner," Nathan said finally, "but it also makes you a potential target if they realize you survived." The implication sent a chill through Delilah. She hadn't considered that the outlaws might come looking for her specifically. The thought that they might track her to her cousin's home in Clearwater was terrifying. Emma, sensing her distress, smoothly changed the subject. "Who's ready for apple pie? Sarah, help me clear these plates." Later, after the children had been tucked into bed and Emma had retired for the night, Delilah found herself on the porch with Nathan and Jacob, the men smoking pipes as they gazed at the stars now visible after the brief evening rain. "What should I do?" she asked quietly. "About what I saw." Nathan considered for a moment, the ember of his pipe glowing in the darkness. "When we reach Clearwater, we'll speak with Sheriff Marks. He's a good man, works closely with Tanner. You can give your statement to him and he'll pass the information along. And then you stay vigilant," he replied honestly. "The law will do what it can, but these parts are still wild. Justice doesn't always move as swiftly as we'd like." Jacob knocked his pipe against the porch railing. "Nathan's being diplomatic. Truth is, the law's stretched thin out here. Too much territory, not enough lawmen. Most folks end up looking after their own safety." The frank assessment didn't surprise Delilah. She had grown up hearing stories of frontier justice and the challenges of establishing law and order in the territories. "My cousin's husband is the town blacksmith," she said. "They live right in Clearwater. Would that be safer than an outlying homestead?" Nathan nodded. "Towns generally safer, yes. More eyes watching, more folks to raise the alarm if trouble comes. And blacksmiths usually command respect, essential trade, good standing in the community." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Delilah's mind remained preoccupied with thoughts of danger and vulnerability. When she finally excused herself to retire for the night, Nathan walked her to the door. "Try not to worry too much," he said quietly. "One step at a time. First, we get you safely to Clearwater, and then," she asked, echoing her earlier question. Nathan's gaze was steady in the lamplight. "And then you decide what kind of life you want to build." You've survived this far. That takes courage most folks don't know they have until they need it. His words stayed with her as she prepared for bed, a strange comfort in their straightforward honesty. There were no false promises, no platitudes, just an acknowledgement of the harsh realities and the inner strength required to face them. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having swept away the humidity of the previous day. After a hearty breakfast and warm farewells from the Millers, Delilah and Nathan set out again, replenished with fresh provisions and rested from a night in proper beds. "How much farther to Clearwater?" Delilah asked as they rode across a meadow dotted with wildflowers. "About 30 miles, Nathan replied. "We should make it by tomorrow evening if the weather holds." The day passed pleasantly, the terrain gradually changing from open prairie to more wooded areas as they approached the foothills. Nathan pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region, his knowledge of the land impressive. "How did you learn so much about this territory?" Delilah asked during a rest stop. Nathan stroked Daisy's neck as the horse drank from a stream. "Spent a winter with a Blackfoot hunting party years back. Got separated from my outfit during a blizzard, broke my leg. Their medicine man said it, and they let me stay until spring, taught me a lot about the land, tracking, survival." "That's remarkable," Delilah said, genuinely impressed. "Most white men I know wouldn't have such a story to tell," he shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by her interest. Was either learn or die, seemed an easy choice at the time. As they continued their journey, Delilah found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Nathan's company. His quiet strength was reassuring, and beneath his reserved exterior, she discovered a thoughtful mind and dry humor that surfaced in unexpected moments. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering again, and the wind had picked up, bending the tall grasses and setting the tree branches swaying. "We need shelter," Nathan observed, scanning the horizon. "That's going to be a powerful storm." "Is there another homestead nearby?" Delilah asked, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Nathan shook his head. "Not for miles, but there's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles east. Used it once during a cattle drive when we got caught in weather like this. Should still be standing." They altered course, pushing Daisy to a faster pace as the first fat raindrops began to fall. By the time they reached the cabin, a crude but solid structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. The rain was coming down in sheets, driven by gusting wind. Nathan helped Delilah dismount and led Daisy to a lean-to attached to the cabin. "Get inside," he shouted over the wind. "I'll take care of the horse." Delilah pushed open the cabin door, wincing at the musty smell that greeted her. The interior was sparse: a rough table, 2 stools, a stone fireplace, and a narrow cot against one wall. Dust and cobwebs suggested it had been some time since anyone had used the place, but the roof appeared sound, and no water was leaking through. She found an old broom in the corner and set about sweeping away the worst of the dust and spider webs. There was a small stack of firewood beside the hearth, and she arranged some kindling in preparation for a fire. Nathan entered, water streaming from his duster and hat. "Daisy's settled," he reported, removing his dripping outerwear and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Storm's picking up." "We might be here through the night." Delilah nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness at the prospect of spending the night alone with him in such close quarters. It was one thing to camp under the open sky, another entirely to share the confines of a single-room cabin. "I found some firewood," she said, gesturing to the hearth, "and I cleared away some of the dust. Good thinking." Nathan knelt by the fireplace, striking a match to the kindling. The flame caught quickly, spreading to the larger pieces of wood. Soon, a cheerful fire was crackling, pushing back the dampness and chill. They prepared a simple meal from their provisions, sitting on the stools by the fire as rain lashed against the cabin walls and thunder rumbled overhead. The storm's fury made conversation difficult, so they ate in companionable silence, the shared warmth and food creating a strange intimacy. After they had eaten, Nathan insisted Delilah take the cot while he spread his bedroll on the floor near the fire. "Get some rest," he suggested. Storm might pass by morning, but sleep proved elusive for Delilah. The unfamiliar surroundings, the howling wind, and the peculiar awareness of Nathan's presence kept her wide awake. After an hour of restless tossing, she gave up and sat up on the cot. Nathan was still awake, sitting by the fire, a small book open in his hands. He glanced up at her movement. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too much on my mind, I suppose." He closed the book, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "Want to talk about it?" Delilah drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I keep thinking about what happens after we reach Clearwater. I haven't seen my cousin in 5 years. Her husband's never met me. What if they don't want the burden of taking me in?" "Family's family," Nathan replied simply. "And from what you've told me, your cousin Rebecca sounds like a good person." "She is," Delilah agreed, "but people change, lives get complicated." She hesitated, then admitted her deeper fear. "And what if the outlaws do come looking for me? I'd be bringing danger to their door." Nathan studied her across the firelit room, his expression thoughtful. "Life's full of risks, Miss Carter. Can't avoid them all, but from what I've seen, you're not one to hide from challenges." "You don't know me well enough to say that," she pointed out. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I know you survived an outlaw attack, fled into the wilderness alone, and kept your wits about you until help arrived. That tells me plenty." His assessment warmed her more than the fire. For days, she had felt nothing but fear and uncertainty. To be seen as strong and capable even if she didn't entirely feel it was unexpectedly heartening. "What's the book?" she asked, nodding toward his pocket. Nathan seemed almost embarrassed. "Just some poetry, Wordsworth." "You enjoy poetry?" Delilah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. He shrugged, that hint of a smile returning. "Man can appreciate beautiful words same as he appreciates a beautiful sunset. No law against it, last I checked." Delilah laughed softly. "No, there certainly isn't. Would you read some? It might help take my mind off things." Nathan hesitated, then drew the small volume from his pocket. "It's nothing fancy. Got it from a peddler passing through the ranch last year." "I don't need fancy," Delilah assured him, "just something besides my own thoughts for company." He opened the book, thumbing through the pages until he found what he was looking for. When he began to read, his voice took on a different quality, softer, more melodic, with none of the roughness of his everyday speech. "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old or let me die." The simple verses, delivered in Nathan's gentle cadence, created an island of peace amidst the storm's chaos. Delilah closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her, carrying away some of the tension she had carried for days. When he finished, a comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the diminishing rumble of thunder as the storm began to move away. "Thank you," Delilah said finally. "That was lovely." Nathan carefully closed the book. "My mother used to read poetry to us on winter evenings, said it was important to keep beauty in your life, especially in hard times." "She sounds wise." She was. His expression grew distant. "Lost her 10 years ago. Fever took her and my little sister both in the same week." "I'm sorry," Delilah said softly. "Losing family leaves a hole nothing quite fills." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That it does, but we keep going, don't we? Find new connections, build something different." Their gazes held across the room, and Delilah felt something shift between them, a deepening of the tentative trust that had been growing during their journey. This man was more than just the stoic cowboy who had offered his protection. He was someone who understood loss, who found solace in poetry, who carried his own burdens with quiet dignity. "You should try to rest," he said eventually, breaking the moment. "Still got a long ride tomorrow." This time, when Delilah lay down on the cot, sleep came more easily. The last thing she remembered was the silhouette of Nathan against the firelight, keeping watch as the storm gradually faded into the distance. Morning brought clear skies, and the fresh, clean scent of rain washed earth. They set out early, both tacitly avoiding mention of the intimacy of the previous evening's conversation. Yet something had changed between them, a comfort, an ease that hadn't existed before. The landscape grew more varied as they traveled, with stands of pine trees and rocky outcroppings breaking up the rolling hills. By midday, they could see the distant rooftops of Clearwater nestled in a valley ahead. There it is, Nathan said, pointing. Should reach it in a few hours. Delilah felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. The end of their journey meant safety and reunion with family, but it also meant parting from Nathan, who had become an unexpected anchor in the chaos of her life. "What will you do after you've delivered me to my cousin?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Head to the ranch, report to the boss," Nathan replied. "Got cattle to move to summer pasture, fences to mend. The ordinary business of life," Delilah murmured. "That's right." There was a pause before he added, "Though I expect I'll be riding into Clearwater now and again. Ranch business brings me there every few weeks." The implication hung in the air between them that this needn't be a final goodbye. Their approach to town was noted by several people working in the outlying fields who waved in friendly greeting. Nathan returned the gestures with easy familiarity. "You know many people here?" Delilah asked. "Most of them," he confirmed. "Small community. Everyone knows everyone else's business, for better or worse." The main street of Clearwater was a typical frontier town arrangement, a wide dirt road flanked by wooden buildings, including a general store, saloon, small church, and various businesses. People moved about their afternoon activities, pausing occasionally to glance curiously at the newcomers. "The blacksmith shop should be at the end of the street," Nathan said, guiding Daisy through the town. "That must be it there." He indicated a large structure with an open front, where the rhythmic clang of metal on metal could be heard even from a distance. As they approached, a burly man in a leather apron looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "Afternoon," Nathan called. "Looking for Daniel Thompson, the blacksmith." "You found him," the man replied, setting down his hammer. His curious gaze shifted to Delilah. "What can I do for you folks?" Delilah's heart pounded with nervous anticipation. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Delilah Carter, Rebecca's cousin from Kansas City." The blacksmith's expression transformed from polite interest to shock. "Miss Carter, but we weren't expecting," he broke off, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Rebecca said you and your uncle would be arriving by stage next month." "There was a change of plans," Delilah explained, her stomach sinking. "And trouble on the trail. Is Rebecca here?" "She's at the house, just behind the shop," Daniel replied, still looking bewildered. He turned and called, "Becca, come out here, quick." A moment later, a pretty woman with auburn hair piled atop her head emerged from a side door, wiping her hands on her apron. She froze at the sight of Delilah, her eyes widening. "Delilah, is that really you?" "Rebecca," Delilah breathed, emotion welling up at the sight of her cousin. She slid from the horse, stumbling slightly as her feet hit the ground after so many hours riding. Nathan was there instantly, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. The small gesture wasn't lost on Rebecca, whose gaze flickered between them with growing curiosity. The cousins embraced tightly, both fighting tears. When they pulled apart, Rebecca held Delilah at arm's length, examining her with concern. "You're thin as a rail, and those clothes, what happened? Where's Uncle George?" The mention of her uncle brought a fresh wave of grief. "There's much to tell you," Delilah said quietly. "None of it good, I'm afraid." Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. "Come inside," she said gently, then glanced at Nathan. "Your friend too, of course." "This is Mr. Nathan Reed," Delilah introduced. "He's the reason I made it here safely." Nathan touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam, Mr. Thompson," Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand. "Any man who helps family is welcome here. Tie up your horse and come in for a proper meal." Inside the Thompson home, Delilah recounted the events of the past week: the attack, her uncle's death, her days alone, and Nathan's timely arrival. Rebecca wept openly at the news of her uncle's passing, while Daniel's expression grew increasingly grim. "These outlaws need to be dealt with," he said when she had finished. "They've been terrorizing the territory long enough." "Miss Carter can identify some of them," Nathan explained. "We were planning to speak with Sheriff Marks about it." Daniel nodded approvingly. "Good man, Marks. Takes his job seriously. I'll send for him after supper." Rebecca, practical despite her grief, insisted on showing Delilah to a room where she could rest and change into clean clothes borrowed from her cousin's wardrobe. "We'll have your things sent from Kansas City," she assured Delilah. "And you'll stay with us, of course. This is your home now." The simple acceptance brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "I don't want to be a burden." Rebecca squeezed her hand. "Family isn't a burden, Delilah, it's a blessing. Now wash up and rest a bit, supper will be ready soon." Left alone, Delilah sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. A week ago, she had been traveling with her uncle, full of hope for their new life in Montana. Then had come terror, loss, survival against the odds, and finally Nathan. She glanced at herself in the small mirror on the wall, hardly recognizing the gaunt, sunburned face that looked back at her. The journey had changed her, inside and out. She was no longer the sheltered young woman who had left Kansas City. She had faced death and survived. She had trusted a stranger and found safety. She had discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. And now she had arrived at her destination, but the thought of Nathan riding away brought an unexpected ache to her heart. Cleaned up and dressed in one of Rebecca's simpler dresses, Delilah returned to the main room to find Nathan engaged in conversation with Daniel about cattle prices and the prospects for the coming season. He had also washed and tidied himself, his dark hair still damp from washing. He rose when she entered, his eyes warm with appreciation. "Miss Carter, you look restored." "I feel it," she replied with a small smile. "Amazing what clean clothes and water can do." Supper was a simple but hearty affair: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. The conversation flowed easily, with Rebecca eager to catch up on news from Kansas City, and Daniel full of questions about the Double R Ranch where Nathan worked. After the meal, as promised, Daniel sent for Sheriff Marks, who arrived promptly, his weathered face serious as he listened to Delilah's account of the attack and her description of the outlaws. "This matches reports we've had from other victims," the sheriff confirmed, jotting notes in a small book. "The leader, the one they call Viper, he's been wanted in 3 territories for going on 2 years now. Will you be organizing a posse?" Nathan asked. Mark sighed, tucking away his notebook. "Already tried that approach twice. They know the mountains too well, vanish like smoke when pursued. Been coordinating with sheriffs in neighboring counties, trying to set a trap, but it's slow going. Meanwhile, they continue to terrorize innocent travelers," Daniel said, his frustration evident. "I know it's hard to be patient," Marks acknowledged, "but rushing in half-cocked would just get more people killed. These aren't amateurs we're dealing with." The discussion continued, with various strategies debated and discarded. Through it all, Delilah was acutely aware of Nathan's presence beside her, solid and reassuring. When the sheriff finally departed, promising to telegraph her description to neighboring jurisdictions, a heavy silence fell over the room. "It's getting late," Nathan said eventually, rising from his chair. "I should find a room at the hotel." "Nonsense," Daniel objected. "We've got a perfectly good spare room. You'll stay here tonight." Nathan hesitated, his gaze flickering briefly to Delilah. "That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," Rebecca insisted. "It's the least we can do after you brought Delilah safely to us." After some further protest, Nathan finally acquiesced, and Rebecca showed him to the small room at the back of the house that normally served as Daniel's workshop for delicate metalwork projects. Later, as Delilah helped her cousin wash the supper dishes, Rebecca gave her a sidelong glance. "He seems like a good man, your Mr. Reed." "He's not my Mr. Reed," Delilah replied quickly, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "He's just a kind stranger who helped me when I needed it." Rebecca's smile was knowing. "If you say so, but I saw the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "Rebecca, what? I'm just making an observation." Her cousin's expression turned more serious. "After what you've been through, it would be natural to feel a connection to the person who helped you survive it." Delilah concentrated on drying a plate, avoiding Rebecca's gaze. "It's not like that. He was doing what any decent person would do." "Was he?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Most men would have pointed you toward town and wished you luck. Not many would escort you personally, risking their own safety in outlaw territory." The observation gave Delilah pause. She hadn't considered that Nathan had gone well beyond what might be expected of a passing stranger. "Even if there were feelings," she said carefully, "he'll be leaving tomorrow. He has responsibilities at the ranch." Rebecca squeezed her arm gently. Life has a way of working things out, Delilah. Don't close your heart to possibilities. With those words lingering in her mind, Delilah retired to her room, but sleep eluded her once again. The soft sounds of the house settling around her, so different from the open wilderness of the past days, felt strangely confining. After an hour of restless tossing, she rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, slipping quietly out to the small back porch for some fresh air. To her surprise, Nathan was already there, leaning against the railing, gazing up at the star-filled sky. He turned at the sound of the door, his expression softening when he saw her. "Couldn't sleep either," Delilah shook her head, joining him at the railing. "Too many thoughts crowding my mind, I suppose." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the night air cool against their skin, the distant howl of a coyote the only sound disturbing the quiet. "I wanted to thank you," Delilah said finally, "for everything you've done. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night." Nathan's profile was strong in the moonlight. "You'd have managed. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'll miss your company on the trail." He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious in the darkness. "Clearwater's not so far from the Double R. As I mentioned, ranch business brings me this way regularly. Is that an invitation to expect you?" Delilah asked, her heart beating faster. Nathan's hand moved to cover hers on the railing, warm and calloused. "If you'd welcome such visits." "I would," she admitted, surprised by her own boldness. His smile was gentle. "Then you can count on seeing me." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Delilah was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his hand on hers, of the way the moonlight cast shadows across his features. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "When I found you by that campfire, I was just looking for a place to rest for the night, never expected to find someone who would make me question the solitary life I've been living." The admission took her breath away. "What are you saying, Nathan?" He moved slightly closer, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "I'm saying that one fire's not enough to keep a person warm in this world, that maybe two hearts together stand a better chance than one alone." Delilah's pulse quickened. "We've known each other less than a week." "Sometimes a week is all it takes to recognize something worth pursuing," he replied, his thumb brushing softly across her cheekbone. "I'm not asking for promises, Delilah, just a chance to see where this might lead." The use of her given name, spoken with such tenderness, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the night air. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future with this man, this quiet, strong, unexpectedly gentle cowboy who had come into her life when she most needed someone to rely on. "I'd like that," she whispered. His smile was like the breaking of dawn. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Nathan leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, something to be cherished. When they parted, Delilah stayed within the circle of his arms, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "We should probably get some rest," Nathan murmured after a long moment. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Reluctantly, Delilah stepped back, already missing his warmth. "You're right. Good night, Nathan." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips for a brief kiss. "Sweet dreams, Delilah." This time, when she returned to her bed, sleep came easily, wrapped in the warmth of new possibilities. Morning brought the inevitable moment of parting. After breakfast, Nathan prepared Daisy for the journey to the Double R, while the Thompsons and Delilah gathered in front of the blacksmith shop to bid him farewell. "You're welcome anytime," Daniel said, shaking Nathan's hand firmly. "Our door is always open to you." "Appreciated," Nathan replied, swinging into the saddle. His gaze found Delilah's, conveying unspoken promises. "I expect I'll be back in town within the fortnight. Ranch needs supplies and the boss has some business with the bank." Delilah nodded, trying to mask her disappointment at the separation. "We'll look forward to seeing you then." With a final tip of his hat, Nathan turned Daisy toward the road leading out of town. Delilah watched until he was just a distant figure on the horizon, her heart both heavy and curiously light with anticipation. "Come on," Rebecca said gently, linking her arm through Delilah's. Let's get you properly settled, there's much to do. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Delilah threw herself into helping around the Thompson household, grateful for the purpose it gave her days. She assisted Rebecca with cooking and cleaning, minded the shop when Daniel needed an extra pair of hands, and gradually became acquainted with the townsfolk of Clearwater. News traveled fast in a small community, and her status as both a survivor of an outlaw attack and the mysterious woman brought to town by Nathan Reed made her an object of considerable interest. Most people were kind, offering condolences for her uncle and welcoming her to their community. A few, particularly some of the younger unmarried women, regarded her with thinly veiled curiosity, clearly wondering about her relationship with the well-respected foreman of the Double R. Don't mind Louisa Benton, Rebecca advised after one such encounter at the general store. She's had her eye on Nathan Reed for 2 seasons, but he's never shown any interest. I hadn't realized he was so popular, Delilah remarked, trying to sound nonchalant. Rebecca laughed. A handsome, hard-working man with a good position and solid character. In a territory where eligible men outnumber women 3-1, of course he's caught attention. She nudged Delilah playfully, but it seems he only had eyes for you. The observation brought both pleasure and uncertainty. Delilah couldn't help wondering if the connection she felt with Nathan was simply the result of extraordinary circumstances, if what had seemed so meaningful under the vast Montana sky would fade in the ordinary light of day-to-day life. These doubts were dispelled the afternoon Nathan rode back into Clearwater, exactly 2 weeks after his departure. Delilah was helping in the shop, organizing Daniel's tools when the distinctive sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Looking up, she saw Nathan dismounting in front of the blacksmith's, his tall figure unmistakable even from a distance. Her heart leapt in her chest, and she hastily wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after hours of work. Delilah, Nathan greeted, removing his hat as he entered the shop. His eyes warmed as they took in the sight of her. You're looking well. As are you, she replied, fighting the urge to smooth her hair. Your journey was uneventful, I hope, peaceful enough. He glanced around. Is Daniel about? Got some business from the ranch. He's delivering a repaired wagon to the Miller farm, Delilah explained. Should be back by supper time. Nathan nodded, then seemed to hesitate. In that case, I wonder if you might be free to take a walk. There's something I'd like to show you. Curiosity piqued, Delilah agreed, quickly removing her apron and leaving a note for Daniel. They walked side by side through town, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Where are we going? Delilah asked as they reached the edge of town and continued along a well-worn path leading toward a small rise. You'll see, Nathan replied with a hint of mystery. It's not far. The path wound through a stand of aspens, their leaves shimmering silver green in the afternoon light. Beyond, it opened onto a small clearing atop the rise, overlooking the valley where Clearwater nestled. The view was breathtaking mountains in the distance, the town laid out below, and the river that gave the settlement its name winding like a silver ribbon through the landscape. It's beautiful, Delilah breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the panorama. Thought you might appreciate it, Nathan said, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. Found this spot my first year in the territory, come here sometimes to think. I can see why. She moved to the edge of the clearing where a large flat rock provided a natural seat. It puts everything in perspective. Nathan joined her, their shoulders almost touching. Been thinking about you, he admitted quietly. Every day since I left. The simple confession sent warmth spreading through her. I've thought of you too. Have you given any consideration to what comes next for you? He asked. Will you stay in Clearwater permanently? Delilah gazed out over the valley. I think so. Rebecca and Daniel have been so welcoming, and I have nowhere else to go, really. Kansas City holds nothing for me now. Nathan nodded slowly. And what about us? The possibility we spoke of that night. She turned to face him, finding his expression earnest and open. I've thought about that too, a great deal actually. And I find myself hoping there could be something between us, she admitted, her cheeks warming. Though it still feels so new, so uncertain, Nathan's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. Nothing's certain in this life, Delilah, but some things are worth taking a chance on. The conviction in his voice gave her courage. What are you proposing exactly? For now, time together, getting to know each other properly, not just as traveling companions in a crisis. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I've arranged with the boss to handle the ranch's business in Clearwater regularly, means I can be in town every couple of weeks. The prospect of seeing him regularly made Delilah's heart lighter than it had been in months. I'd like that very much. His smile was all the answer she needed. They sat together as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, talking easily about everything and nothing: his work at the ranch, her adjustment to life in Clearwater, childhood memories, hopes for the future. When they finally walked back to town, hand in hand, Delilah felt as though something important had shifted into place in her world. Over the following months, their courtship progressed with a measured pace that suited them both. Nathan's visits to Clearwater became the highlights of Delilah's weeks, eagerly anticipated and savored. They developed rituals walks to their special overlook, Sunday dinners with the Thompsons, occasional dances at the town hall where Nathan revealed a surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. Delilah found herself flourishing in her new life. She took a position helping at the town's small school 3 days a week, discovering a talent for teaching that brought her genuine satisfaction. The children responded well to her patience and creativity, and the modest income gave her a measure of independence that she valued. Meanwhile, the shadow of the Viper gang continued to hang over the territory. Reports of robberies and attacks came periodically, though none as close to Clearwater as the one Delilah had survived. Sheriff Marks kept them informed of efforts to capture the outlaws, but progress was frustratingly slow. Hard to pin down men who know every cave and canyon in 3 counties, the sheriff explained during one of his regular visits to the Thompson home, but we're closing in. Got lawmen watching key passes and trading posts. Sooner or later, they'll make a mistake. The uncertainty created a persistent undercurrent of tension in an otherwise peaceful existence. Delilah occasionally woke from nightmares in which the scarred face of the outlaw leader loomed over her, his laughter echoing as he discovered she had survived to identify him. On those nights, she would sit by her window until dawn, drawing comfort from the knowledge that she was no longer alone and vulnerable. By the time autumn painted the aspen groves in shades of gold and crimson, Delilah and Nathan's relationship had deepened into something neither of them could deny or resist. They had shared their histories, their fears, their dreams, building a foundation of trust and understanding that went far beyond their dramatic first meeting. It was on a crisp October evening, as they walked back from their overlook beneath a sky ablaze with sunset colors, that Nathan stopped abruptly in the middle of the path. "Delilah," he said, his voice unusually solemn, "there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened as he took both her hands in his. "What is it?" "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he began, his eyes never leaving hers. "I came to Montana looking for work, for a place to belong. Never expected to find the other half of my soul sitting beside a lonely campfire." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes as she recognized the direction of his words. "I know it hasn't been long by some standards," Nathan continued, "but I've lived enough to know when something is right." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the fading light. "Delilah Carter, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ring he held was a simple band of gold with a small, perfect pearl set in the center. Not ostentatious, but beautiful in its understated elegance, much like the man who offered it. "Yes," she whispered, her vision blurring with tears of joy. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." His face transformed with happiness as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh through her tears. When he finally set her down, his kiss was tender with promise, sealing their commitment under the vast Montana sky that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely love story. They announced their engagement that evening over supper with the Thompsons, who received the news with enthusiastic approval. Rebecca immediately began discussing wedding plans, while Daniel insisted on opening a bottle of fine whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. "Have you thought about where you'll live?" Rebecca asked, practical as always. "The Double R is quite a distance from town." Nathan and Delilah exchanged glances. "We've discussed it," Nathan replied. "I've been saving to buy a place of my own for years. There's a small ranch coming available just outside Clearwater. Old man Jenkins is moving to Oregon to live with his daughter. It would put us close enough to town for Delilah to continue teaching, and I could still work for the Double R." "Jenkins' place is good land," Daniel agreed, nodding thoughtfully. "Good water, decent grazing, needs some work on the buildings, but nothing a skilled hand couldn't manage." "And when would you plan to marry?" Rebecca pressed, already mentally calculating the time needed for preparations. "Spring," Delilah answered. "After the winter snows have cleared, it would give us time to secure the property and make necessary repairs before moving in." The conversation flowed easily, full of plans and possibilities, the future stretching bright before them. Later, as Nathan prepared to return to the ranch, propriety dictating he couldn't stay overnight now that their engagement was official, he pulled Delilah aside for a private moment on the porch. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. "Ranch life isn't easy, especially for a woman used to town living." Delilah touched his face gently. "I'm sure about you, Nathan. The rest we'll figure out together." His smile was tender as he kissed her once more before mounting Daisy for the ride back to the Double R. "I'll be back in 2 weeks. We can go see the Jenkins place together." She watched him ride away, her heart full to bursting with happiness and anticipation. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight, a tangible symbol of promises made and a future awaiting them. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Nathan secured an agreement to purchase the Jenkins property, contingent on final approval from his employer at the Double R, who had promised to advance part of the purchase price against Nathan's future wages. Delilah divided her time between teaching, helping Rebecca with household tasks, and beginning to collect items for her own future home. News came that Sheriff Marks and his counterparts in neighboring counties had narrowly missed capturing members of the Viper Gang after a stage robbery near the territorial border. 2 of the outlaws had been wounded in the encounter, according to reports, but all had escaped into the mountains as winter's first snow began to fall. "They'll likely lie low through the worst of winter," Sheriff Marks told them during one of his visits. "These types usually hole up somewhere remote until spring makes traveling easier." The information brought a measure of relief. By the time the outlaws resumed their activities, Delilah would be married and settled in her new life, the traumatic events of the past fading into memory. Winter descended on Montana with characteristic severity. Heavy snows made travel between the Double R and Clearwater increasingly difficult, reducing Nathan's visits to once a month at best. Delilah threw herself into wedding preparations to distract from the separation, working with Rebecca to sew a simple but elegant wedding dress and corresponding with Nathan's sister in Wyoming, who had promised to attend the spring ceremony. Christmas brought a brief respite from winter's isolation. Nathan arrived 3 days before the holiday, bearing gifts and the news that he had officially secured ownership of the Jenkins property. "It's ours," he announced triumphantly, unfolding the deed on the Thompsons' kitchen table. "Signed and registered yesterday." The celebration was joyous, with the Thompsons and several neighbors gathering for a festive Christmas Eve dinner. Delilah, watching Nathan chat easily with Daniel and the other men, felt a surge of gratitude for the unexpected turns her life had taken. The tragedy that had brought her to Montana had led, ultimately, to finding not just safety and family, but love and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. January and February passed in a blur of snowstorms and quiet evenings by the fire. Delilah continued teaching, finding satisfaction in the progress of her students despite the challenges of winter attendance. Nathan's visits were precious interludes, each departure harder than the last as their wedding day drew closer. With March came the first hints of spring longer days, melting snow, and the return of birdsong to the valley. Nathan took advantage of the improving weather to begin repairs on their future home, riding to Clearwater more frequently as the roads cleared. Delilah often accompanied him to the Jenkins place after school, helping to clean and prepare the modest cabin for their occupation after the wedding. "It's not much compared to the Thompsons' house," Nathan remarked one afternoon as they worked together to hang curtains Delilah had sewn. "But it's a start. It's perfect," she assured him, standing back to admire their handiwork. "It's ours." Their wedding was set for the first Saturday in April, with the whole town invited to celebrate. As the day approached, excitement and anticipation filled the Thompson household. Rebecca fussed over final details of the dress. Daniel prepared a special wedding gift in his forge, and Delilah found herself alternating between serene happiness and flutters of nervous anticipation. 2 days before the wedding, Nathan arrived in Clearwater earlier than expected, his expression unusually grave as he dismounted in front of the blacksmith shop. "What is it?" Delilah asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Has something happened?" Nathan glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Sheriff Marks sent word to the ranch. The Viper gang was spotted near Whitefish yesterday. They've come out of hiding earlier than expected." Delilah's stomach clenched with fear. "Are they heading this way?" "No one knows for certain," Nathan replied, his hand finding hers in a reassuring grip. "But the sheriff thought we should be aware, given your history with them." The news cast a shadow over their wedding preparations, though both tried not to let it dampen their spirits. Sheriff Marks increased patrols around Clearwater as a precaution, and Nathan arranged for several of his fellow ranch hands to be present at the wedding, ostensibly as guests, but with the added benefit of extra protection if needed. The wedding morning dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union about to take place. Delilah stood before the mirror in Rebecca's bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The simple white dress, with its delicate lace collar and pearl buttons, transformed her from the schoolteacher she had become into a bride, Nathan's bride. "You look beautiful," Rebecca said softly, adjusting the small circlet of spring flowers that crowned Delilah's dark hair. "Nathan won't know what hit him." Delilah smiled, a mixture of joy and lingering nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "I can hardly believe this day is finally here." "Believe it," her cousin replied, squeezing her shoulders gently. "You deserve every happiness, Delilah, both of you do." The small church was filled to capacity when Daniel escorted Delilah down the aisle. Faces turned to watch her progress: friends, neighbors, students, and their parents, but Delilah saw only Nathan, standing tall and handsome beside the minister, his eyes never leaving her face. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. They had chosen traditional vows, the familiar words taking on new depth and meaning as they promised to love and cherish each other through all of life's joys and sorrows. When Nathan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his eyes shone with emotion that matched the fullness in her own heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Nathan's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Reed for the first time, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration continued at the town hall, transformed for the occasion with spring flowers and ribbons. There was music from local fiddle players, dancing, and a feast to which the entire community had contributed. Nathan rarely left Delilah's side, his hand finding hers often as if to reassure himself that this happiness was real and lasting. As evening approached, they prepared to depart for their new home. Friends and family gathered outside to see them off, showering them with good wishes and handfuls of grain for prosperity. Nathan helped Delilah into the wagon he had decorated specially for the occasion, then climbed up beside her, taking the reins of the matched pair of horses, a wedding gift from his employer at the Double R. "Ready, Mrs. Reed?" he asked, his smile tender in the fading light. "More than ready, mister." "Reid," she replied, Her heart overflowing with joy, with a wave to their well-wishers, Nathan flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward toward their future. The road to their new home wound through the outskirts of town and into the surrounding countryside, the journey familiar now after their many visits to prepare the property. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, each absorbed in the momentous change that had occurred in their lives. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and rose, a fitting backdrop for the beginning of their marriage. "Happy?" Nathan asked, his voice soft in the gathering dusk. Delilah leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "Completely, and you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "When I found you by that campfire last year, I never imagined we'd end up here. It seems like a lifetime ago," Delilah mused. "So much has changed." "For the better," Nathan added, his arm tightening around her waist. As they approached their property, the small cabin came into view, lamplight glowing warmly in the windows, a welcoming beacon in the twilight. "Someone's lit the lamps," Delilah observed, surprised. Nathan smiled. "Ask Daniel to send one of the boys ahead to get things ready for us. Wanted everything to be perfect for your first night in our home." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "It's already perfect because you're here." They pulled up to the cabin, and Nathan set the brake before jumping down from the wagon. Instead of helping Delilah descend in the usual manner, he reached up and lifted her bodily from the seat, cradling her in his arms. "Nathan," she laughed, holding tight to his shoulders. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he replied with mock solemnity. "It's tradition, or so I'm told." He carried her to the door, managing to open it without setting her down, and stepped into their home. The interior was warm and inviting, a fire crackling in the hearth, fresh flowers on the table, and a bottle of wine with 2 glasses set out beside a small wedding cake. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," Nathan said softly, finally lowering her to her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Delilah looked around the simple cabin at the curtains she had sewn, the quilt Rebecca had given them as a wedding gift, the sturdy furniture Nathan had either built or purchased in anticipation of their life together. It was modest by some standards, but to her, it represented everything she had ever wanted: security, belonging, and above all, love. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. "Everything I could have wished for." Nathan's expression grew serious, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure? It's not much compared to what some men could offer you." "I don't want what other men could offer," Delilah replied firmly. "I want you, Nathan Reed, you and the life we'll build together." His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He bent to kiss her, his lips conveying everything words could not: devotion, desire, and the promise of a lifetime of such moments to come. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bearing silent witness to the beginning of their journey together. Inside, by the light of the fire, Nathan and Delilah celebrated their union, their past trials forgotten in the joy of present happiness and future promise. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall, their first year of marriage passing in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. They established routines and traditions, learning the rhythm of life together with all its challenges and rewards. Delilah continued teaching in town 3 days a week, while Nathan divided his time between their small ranch and his duties at the Double R. The shadow of the Viper gang gradually receded as months passed, with no sign of the outlaws in their immediate vicinity. Reports placed them further north, near the Canadian border, their activities seemingly focused away from the Clearwater area. By their first anniversary, Delilah had news that brought fresh joy to their household. She was expecting their first child, due in the late autumn. Nathan's reaction to the announcement was everything she could have hoped for, his face transforming with wonder and happiness before he swept her into a gentle embrace. "A baby," he marveled, his hand tentatively touching her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The months of waiting passed quickly, filled with preparations and anticipation. Nathan added a small room to their cabin, working in the evenings and on days when he wasn't required at the Double R. Delilah sewed tiny garments and quilted a special blanket. each stitch a promise of love for the child growing beneath her heart. Their son, George Daniel Reed, named for Delilah's uncle and her cousin's husband, arrived on a crisp October day as the aspen leaves turned gold on the hillsides. He was a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to match his mother's. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered, cradling his newborn son with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Absolutely perfect." Parenthood brought new joys and challenges to their life together. Sleepless nights gave way to the wonder of first smiles, first words, first steps. Little George grew strong and curious, the center of their world and the physical embodiment of the love they shared. As their second anniversary approached, they received news that brought closure to a chapter of their past. Sheriff Marks rode out to their ranch one afternoon, his expression satisfied as he delivered the information. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, accepting the coffee Delilah offered. "The Viper gang's been caught. Federal marshals cornered them in Wyoming after a bank robbery went wrong, 2 dead, including Viper himself. The rest headed for prison." The news brought a complex mixture of emotions, relief, certainly, but also a strange sense of anticlimax. The outlaws who had altered the course of Delilah's life so dramatically were no longer a threat, yet the memory of that terrible day would always remain a part of her story. "You all right?" Nathan asked that evening, finding her standing on their porch, gazing at the stars after putting George to bed. "Yes," she replied thoughtfully. "Just thinking about how strangely life works. If not for those outlaws, I might never have met you." Nathan's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Delilah leaned back against his solid warmth, finding comfort in his steadfast presence. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night by the campfire, about one fire not being enough?" "I remember," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You were right," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "One person alone is vulnerable. But together, we've built something strong and lasting." Nathan's eyes, so familiar and beloved now, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "And we're just getting started, Mrs. Reed, just getting started." As if to emphasize his point, a cry came from inside the cabin, little George awakening and demanding attention. They shared a knowing smile before going inside together to tend to their son, their steps perfectly in sync after years of moving through life as one. In the years that followed, their family grew with the addition of a daughter, Rebecca Emma, born 2 years after George. Their small ranch prospered under Nathan's careful management, eventually allowing him to leave his position at the Double R and focus solely on their own land. Delilah continued teaching until their 3rd child was on the way, then devoted herself to raising their growing family and contributing to community life in other ways. She started a small lending library in one corner of the general store, organized regular quilting bees that served as social occasions for the women of Clearwater, and became known for her generous hospitality to newcomers in the area. As Montana progressed from territory to statehood, they witnessed the gradual taming of the frontier they had known. The railroad came through a town 20 miles away, bringing increased commerce and new settlers. Clearwater grew from a small settlement to a proper town with a bank, a newspaper, and eventually, electric lights. Through it all, Nathan and Delilah's love remained the constant center of their world, deepening and maturing with each passing year, each challenge faced together, each joy shared. The simple cabin they had started in expanded to accommodate their growing family, but its heart remained the same. The hearth where they gathered on winter evenings, the table where they shared meals and stories, the porch where they watched sunsets and counted stars. On their 20th anniversary, with their children growing into young adults and the century drawing to a close, Nathan surprised Delilah with a special gift, a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children on one side, and on the other, a tiny painted scene of a solitary campfire beneath a star-filled sky. "To remember where we began," he explained as he fastened it around her neck, "and everything that's come since." Delilah touched the locket, emotion welling in her throat. "I've never forgotten," she whispered. not for a single day. That night, they walked together to the rise overlooking their land, the special place that had become their retreat over the years. The valley spread before them, transformed by 2 decades of progress, yet still recognizably the place where they had built their life together. Regrets. Nathan asked, his arm around her waist, his voice holding the slight rasp of age that had gradually replaced the smooth tones of his youth. Delilah looked up at him at the silver threading through his dark hair, the laugh lines etched around his eyes, the strong features that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. In his face, she could still see the cowboy who had emerged from the darkness that night by her desperate campfire, offering protection when she most needed it. "Not one," she replied with perfect honesty. "Every step of the journey has been worth it because it was with you." As the sun set over the Montana landscape they both loved, Nathan bent to kiss her with the same tenderness that had marked their first kiss so many years before. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the land and wrapped in the love that had sustained them through all of life's seasons, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of the man beside her. "One fire wasn't enough," Nathan murmured against her lips, echoing the words that had begun their story. "It never could have been." "No," Delilah agreed, her heart full to overflowing with gratitude for the life they had created together. "But 2 hearts together. That's a fire that never goes out." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the lights of home, where their children waited, and the next chapter of their story continued to unfold, a story of love found by a campfire, tested by adversity, and strengthened by the passage of time, burning as brightly in the twilight of their years as it had in the dawn of their beginning.